of your Thursday to our the latest in our series of Cricket Research Network webinars, and I'm really excited for this one, actually, because it's a topic that's close to my heart, having done a reasonable amount of research into kind of governance and leadership within cricket specifically. So the title of this webinar is Building Leadership in English Cricket. I'm first of all going to introduce our three panelists today, and then I'm going to hand over to John, who's going to kind of take up the mantle, as it were. So first of all, we have with us John Swanwick, who's the chair of the Cricket Club Development Network, which is a community of practice providing mutual support to those running cricket clubs. He's obviously also a regular contributor to The Cricketer, and I believe he's going to talk about one of the pieces he's recently written for them in a minute. I'm also delighted that we have with us Sean Jarvis, former CEO of Leicestershire County Cricket Club, who obviously, as most of you will be familiar with, absolutely turned the fortunes of the club around. They won the Men's One Day Cup in 2023, their first silverware since, I think it was since 1985. So we're delighted that he can be with us to kind of provide some reflections on that and leadership more broadly. And our third panelist is John Neal, formerly head of coach development at the England and Wales Cricket Board, once famously described cricket coaching to me as the League of Gentlemen for a Guardian piece, but obviously did some incredible work at the ECB to try to change that. So I'd be interested to hear some of his reflections on that. So we're going to start by as I say, John's going to say a few words. We'll ask a few questions to all of our panelists, and then there will be time for you to kind of come in with your own questions. Feel free to type questions into the chats, or we could potentially bring you in directly. Yeah, but if questions occur to you as we're going through, then do put them in the chat. So yeah, thank you everyone for being with us, and I'll hand over to John now, who's going to talk us through his proposition. John, we can't hear you if you are speaking. John, I still can't hear you. You need to unmute yourself. Yes, I can hear you now. Yes, perfect.
Okay, so I was busily talking to myself there. Sorry about that. Yeah, basically, I could leave this slide up, but this is the proposition in the bullet points. I'm going to rattle through this in 10 minutes, and then we'll get to the main acts. But framing the conversation today, just start by basically putting forward this proposition that we may be looking at county and recreational cricket through the wrong end of the telescope if we assume that they are fundamentally different, and on the face of it, and they face different challenges. I want to suggest that while the scale differs, the big challenges for both clubs and county clubs are shared, that building the leadership to deliver financial resilience and long-term sustainability in one interconnected ecosystem. This came from an article written by Fanos Hero, who was Worcestershire chair and author of the independent review of ECB finance for the non-100 counties, who wrote a prescient piece in the Cricketer this time last year. My take on his analysis is that the common framing of strong counties versus weak counties, often based on their 100 status, balance sheets and competitiveness on the field, risks missing deeper issues. If future broadcast revenues soften, as they look like they may do when they're shared differently after 2029 at the earliest, and assuming that the broadcast revenues contracts are renewed, anything like current rates, then we are going to see a huge pressure on all clubs, irrespective of the size of their balance sheet, that smaller counties are not necessarily going to be uniquely exposed. Recreational clubs are in the same boat, often with far less margin for error at a time when ECB funding has declined and is now crystallised in a new £5 million recreational settlement, which is down from the £14 million in 2022-23. Clubs also face significant capital requirements, facilities, capacity for more cricket, women and girls programmes, community expectations, and in many cases, basic tenure security. More than 3/4 regarded major facility investment as a high or very high priority, especially the 1/3 with short leases or rentals on their ground. Many clubs now look less like traditional sports clubs and more like community enterprises. They run events, hire out venues, develop commercial activity, expand social membership, and take on broader community functions. So the strategic question, they converge. How do we diversify income? How do we grow audiences? How do we convert participation into value? How do we sustain assets and capability without exhausting a small group of volunteers? Those are ecosystem questions, not just counter questions or recreational questions. I'll give you a practical example. As cricketers' lives got busier, clubs now need at least twice as many adult players as there are team places. Around those players sit many more juniors, parents, families, volunteers, ground staff, social members, fundraisers, spectators, supporters, and fellow travellers of all sorts. Typically, there might be about 10 other club-involved people for every active player on play cricket. And that doesn't include, in our case, at Staplehurst in Kent, around 7,000 annual visitors to our ground that I calculated for sponsorship purposes, or several thousand more reached via social media. If you multiply that across the county, Kent, for example, has roughly 300 clubs with, say, an average of 500 people in their direct circle of influence. That's around 150,000 people. Yet fewer than 4,000 are county members, and even fewer are Kent cricket free live stream viewers. The gap between cricket's potential audience and realised engagement is extraordinary. It's not simply a marketing issue, it's a leadership challenge, a systems problem. The ecosystem is full of future players, volunteers, sponsors, commercial partners, bequesters, investors, local influencers, and local authority funders, and the occasional MP. County boards are arguably the most ambitious, but also potentially the most important part of the cricket system. They sit between ECB strategy, county realities, and recreational delivery. And there are different shapes, sizes, and accountabilities in all the 39, not just the first 18 first-class counties. Are they recreational game representatives? Are they regulators, programme managers, talent developers, conveners, growth catalyzers, or deliverers? They're different things in different places, but often they're trying or they're expected to be all of them simultaneously. The CPA2 governance framework quietly acknowledges that complexity, with its emphasis on legal form, relationships between county entities, proportionality by scale, and clarity about the split between board oversight and executive delivery. Their role needs to be clearer, not just for the client groups, but for the people who run them. My view, and that of many I speak to in clubs, take county boards away from frontline regulation and put that responsibility firmly on the ECB, the cricket regulator, and the individual leagues. County boards should be local ecosystem growth engines. Their purpose should be straightforward, to state at least, if not to deliver. Maximise value creation across counties and clubs. Work jointly towards participation, audiences, and long-term sustainability in its broadest sense. It needs real subsidiarity, ownership sitting where it is most appropriate, not assumed where it's not. Boards should orchestrate, galvanise, and occasionally supplement rather than seek to micromanage. If the mission is shared, mutually agreed KPIs should become the translation mechanism between ECB ambitions, county and club sustainability, and local market realities. County board delivery of Chance to Shine in schools is an obvious example. Put the onus on long-term participation, not just completing a 6-week assignment. Bring kids and their families into the ecosystem for the long term. Most of those schools are within 1 mile of a club, and there are lots of club people who will calculate the lifetime value in cash, not just social return on investment, of a new junior member and their entourage. Most progressive companies have long since moved away from conflating performance management with reward. KPIs are used to align strategic ambition with team contributions and individual capability development. Get the right KPIs, and ECB and counties should start to see the compelling logic of funding county boards properly, rather than expecting them to organise sponsored fell walking and fundraising golf days. There is significant leadership capability in the recreational game already, based just on weight of numbers. Our 2022 survey of club leaders showed 65% were in management, senior management or executive leadership. Another 16% were either self-employed or owning a business. So the issue may not be absence of talent, but fragmentation. Capability is dispersed, underused, and most feel disconnected from the places where county level and system level decisions are shaped. Many of the people running clubs are also coaches, in work as well as cricket. Senior leaders are constantly shaping people, standards, behaviours and culture, whether we call that coaching or not. There are thousands in the game with one coaching qualification or another. This is an example of one integrated first-class county and county board structure, with roles filled by qualified cricket coaches highlighted in red. Coaching is threaded through the structure, even in this case to the CEO. So coaching needs to incorporate leadership just as much as leadership incorporates coaching. Because if coaches are distributed throughout the game, as they are, many of them are shaping critical competencies and influencing vital relationships across the ecosystem. Leadership is not just a boardroom or CEO question. I'm sure we'll come back to that discussion later. There is, though, a more uncomfortable question. Before we ask how to develop leaders, we may need to ask whether the right people are in the right places, with the right relationships and decision rights, to see the challenge at the scale it now exists and is likely to grow given the financial context we saw earlier. That is not mainly a training issue. It's a question of leadership architecture and leadership system fit. Whether the counties, boards and clubs are set up actually reflects the fact that the ecosystem matters. The framework behind this image is one way of making that visible. It comes from work on wicked leadership problems in organisations and adapted for work across cricket. In essence, it boils down to 3 types of leadership capacity and 3 types of organisational challenge, and asks whether an organisation is able and indeed willing to meet the more complex ones. It also presents the obvious tension between governance, compliance and assurance on the one hand, and adaptation, innovation and ecosystem building critical to marketing the cricket brand on the other. Do the current evolving frameworks allow enough space for the kinds of leadership the game now says it wants and will need? Not just operators, but enablers and system shapers. It changes the starting point. The first question can no longer be what program do we run? It has to be, where is the value actually created today? Where is ambition outrunning capability? Where are leadership systems pulling against themselves? Which organisations are stuck in operational competence when their context requires enabling or system shaping capacity? And how are governance or funding mechanisms nudging them in one direction rather than another? Only then do development interventions make sense. Sometimes the answer will be broader, distributed leadership across employees, volunteers, and clubs. Sometimes it will be governance, decision rights, board composition, role clarity. Sometimes it will be executive overload, board management misalignment, or a failure to connect talent across the ecosystem. Different diagnoses, different solutions. This is also where the research opportunity becomes interesting. The question may no longer be just how we improve leadership within the single county or club, but how leadership operates across an entire ecosystem. How counties, boards, clubs, volunteers, partners, and communities create value collectively, and how that is amplified or blocked by the way the system is organized. And there is a great deal of baseline data we simply do not have. So that's why this discussion is so important and timely. Thanks.
Thank you so much for that, John. Some really, really important and interesting questions there. We did already have a question come into the chat about is it possible to see the CPA2, the County Partnership Agreement 2? Is that public?
No, they're all individually agreed between ECB. Sorry.
No, I was just going to say I thought that would be the answer. Yeah, thank you.
Well, it's like trying to get into Fort Knox to try and get hold of a copy. But I'm sure Sean has seen one. But I'm sure he's also under some kind of NDA agreement. But they are very secret. But fortunately, somebody left a governance framework assessment document on a website somewhere that wasn't published, but it was just, you could scrape it off with AI, which I did, obviously. So I've got that, but there's no individual agreements anywhere. I've tried, believe me. I've bribed and I've pleaded and I've wailed. But there are individual documents between the county and the ECB.
Thank you. I hope that answers your question, Alan. It's a shame in a way, but there we are. So let's bring in our second lot of panelists then. So I might come to you first, Sean. I mean, I suppose for both of you, really, you've both kind of sort of lived this from different angles. When you hear this idea proposed by John of cricket as a kind of a coherent, unified ecosystem rather than a set of separate organisations, what do you make of it? Is there anything about it that makes you uneasy or sceptical? Yeah, what do you think of it overall? So, Sean, I'll come to you first, please. Thank you.
Thanks, Raf, and thanks, John, for the intro. Raf, just before I begin, I just want to pull you up on something. It was very kind of you to mention the One Day Cup, but you admitted I was chief exec at Leicestershire when we got promoted last season to Division 1. I never tire of saying that. We were the only club when I got involved in cricket. I was told on numerous occasions that Leicestershire were the only club never to be promoted out of Division 2. So it was a nice way to finish my tenure at Leicestershire to get us promoted. I won't mention how we're getting on at the moment. We'll move swiftly on from that. But coming back to the point about the ecosystem and what John has mentioned there, for me, I spent 5 years working with Leicestershire and the ECB and the partners and effectively in the ecosystem. And I think it's a bit like a cake. The ingredients are all there. You can see that there are so many moving parts within cricket PLC, from grassroots right the way to the elite level. So they're all there, but the difficulty for me is getting those ingredients right. It's making them work together. It's a bit, I guess it's a bit like if you choose certain ingredients, you've got to put them all together so that they all work within the system, and you create a cake that I guess Paul Hollywood is going to give you a handshake. And I don't think in my 5 years at Leicestershire that ever happened, that those ingredients, that ecosystem really worked to its full potential. For me, you see a lot of personal self-interest, so a lot of egos that become prominent. a bit of lip service to the ecosystem. So you can sort of see why it kind of falls down in certain parts. However, the ingredients are there, and it's just I guess the $64 million question is making those ingredients work. And should that be the ECB that fires that up, or is that the whole ecosystem, which would be incredibly difficult?
Yeah, John Swanwick, did you want to respond to that question about whose responsibility is it?
Well, I guess that it's going to be the ECB that has to convene this, or the individual actors do it themselves within their county framework. But at the end of the day, the governance requirements, the framework in which everybody's operating to some extent or another, and is determined at central level. So it's going. I think the obvious elephant in the room here is that the ECB are going to need to make these sorts of decisions and relinquish their levers of power, if you like, over sort of some of the domain, which they may not be that keen to do, but I think if we're going to see a realistic response to the challenges that everybody faces across the system, that's going to be a necessity. And at the moment, we're seeing a very narrow focus on one or two critical issues that have been clearly identified as risk factors, but also in terms of EDI, for example, there clearly is sort of significant growth factors as well, but it is quite narrowly focused.
Thank you. Steve, I can see you've got your hand up. I'm just going to come to John Neal first of all, and then I'll come to you. And if anyone else does have questions and wants to ask them directly, then do feel free to raise your hand on Teams. But John, what do you make of this kind of suggestion that cricket is a sort of a unified ecosystem? And I suppose particularly as somebody who did work for the ECB and has a kind of sort of lived experience of that side of things, really.
I would naively say that it should be an ecosystem, but in reality, I don't think it is. That we should require each other. If we want young players coming through, we need clubs, we need well-funded clubs, we need a good pathway, etc., etc., etc. However, when I came into the ECB, I'd worked in professional sport for 20 years before that and seen this big fight between those that want to win and those that want to participate. And I tried to change that when I came in coaching, and 7 times more coaches came in. But this is where my naivety came in. It wasn't really valued, if I'm truthful with you, that actually what the top of the game wants is they just want the best players, the best coach, and they want to win. And they closely associate the winning with the money. And that's, for me, what drives a lot of them. Particularly, I'm not saying this necessarily at the counties. Some of the counties, I think, get it. But I think at the top part of the game, it is just about winning, and they will, as we've seen, discard people, human beings, a little bit like a piece of meat if they're not enabling them to succeed. So the community game, I think, is more about development and bringing people through, and actually the game I prefer because it's more associated with social change and doing the right thing and all that sort of stuff. At the top of the game, I still think it's pretty ruthless, and it's all about get the win. And if you get the win, it doesn't really matter because they will then fall down and go, well, we drive the revenue. So the rest of the game, the rest of the ecosystem should be very grateful. And I think until that is addressed, in not just cricket, by the way, I've worked across 8 or 9 different sports, still they battle with the same problem that the obsession with winning at the top of the game drives a lot of the behaviour.
And that's interesting because obviously, Sean, you've just talked to us about kind of Leicestershire and that being a really sort of central element of your pride and what you were able to do at the club. Does what John's just said sort of chime with your experience?
Yeah, it does. I mean, winning is why we're involved in sport. That is every competition that is put in front of Leicestershire County Cricket. But it was our intention try and win it, whether that's the one day, the county championship, or the T20. But it's all about the processes, the systems underneath, the respect, how you manage and work with that whole ecosystem in Leicestershire and some of the minor counties as well. So it flows. I mean, at the very top, yeah, we wanted to win. If we came up against Warwickshire in a T20 game, and I see Stuart's on here, it's always nice when we beat Warwickshire, you know, and that was the intention, because winning teams do drive bums on seats, do drive commercial partners, do drive successes, and it filters. As long as organisations, as clubs, then can manage that and actually work with its local ecosystem, then it can be a real power for good. I have seen, I mean, equally, I've been involved in football and rugby league to a lesser degree, and you do see some of the elite clubs who become very arrogant, and it's about them, and it's about you know, their Saturday afternoon or their 4-day game, and that's wrong. That's the wrong mentality. It's got to be a golden thread running through Cricket PLC, that clubs at elite level do work with the county boards, work with the amateur clubs, and have that relationship working throughout. It's crucial. But like I say, I have seen clubs where they are concerned about themselves, and that's it.
Thank you. That's really interesting. Steve, I will come to you now if you just want to unmute yourself and ask your question to our panelists. Thank you.
Thank you. For those of you who I didn't have the privilege of meeting at Cambridge, as you can tell, I'm an American, and I've been studying English cricket for 21 years when I was brought in by 2 British economists to create what would have been the first Premier League in the English summer in 2005, a prospect that was dead on arrival at the ECB because of its impact on county cricket. And my perception, based on what John and Sean have been talking about, is that your challenge is primarily structural. As long as county cricket is governed by the members of the county cricket board, and the members of Kent County Cricket are people who pay money principally so that they can get better seats for the Kent County Cricket season, which is the incentive to be a paying member of Kent County Cricket. And then the Kent County Cricket chairman, elected by these paying members who want to see Kent County Cricket, becomes the governor of the ECB. It is very hard to move from a system where the top priority is winning the county cricket at the professional level at the expense of sports fans, recreational consumers, women, diversity, and any of the other goals that you're calling for. So I wondered if the panelists could comment on, I've been scribbling an agreement, and hope Ralph will put me in touch with all of you after the meeting, but I wonder if you could comment about how you're going to accomplish these valid and worthy objectives when you basically have to me, I don't want to be insulting to anybody, but this is a version of these Middle Eastern states where the vast majority of residents are immigrants who work for them, and the only people who run things are the small number of people who actually live there. And this strikes me as English cricket.
Thanks, Steve. Well, who wants to come in on that one?
Yeah, I'm happy to add a bit of comment. I'm no longer involved in cricket, so I guess I can take my gloves off a little bit and try and talk openly. For me, I think one of the issues, and this is not specific purely to cricket. It does operate in football as well, where you've got county cricket boards or foundations, and then you've got the elite. And you've got these two organisations within one cricket operation, if you like. So Leicestershire, as an example, they had a foundation, and then they had the cricket board. So the foundation was responsible for the community. It was responsible for those clubs that are out there, and the cricket board was then responsible for the elite, the women's team and the men's team and the academy, if you like, and developing that sort of side. Now, what you've got is two very strong boards, if you like, and both doing magnificent things. But where I think the problem lies, and this is where the problem lies within ecosystem, is though they are not joining up in their thinking. I'm not saying everybody's like that. There are some good examples out there, but they need to be closer, and they need to understand each other's objectives on how to be successful. So if I speak on behalf of the professional team at Leicestershire, they were very passionate about getting the foundation to drive bums on seats that could fill the ground and meet CPA standards, etc. Whereas the cricket board, they were more inclined to sort of be out there getting kids to play cricket, which again is a tremendous objective. But where the problem lies, I think, is that connection between the two. And let me tell you, it is no different in football. Football exactly the same. Foundations within football clubs do have their issues with the board of directors of football clubs. So that bridge, I don't think as strong as it should be. Now, coming to another point that I think Steve made, and I've been a champion of this for five years, ever since I was at Leicestershire, was, and this is where I look at football, and I'm quite envious from a cricket perspective, is that cricket doesn't have a degree, an undergraduate, master's, or educational program that can attract people into the game and learn and be educated. So, for example, I always cited this example where we may have a cricketer who is very intelligent, knows the game, been involved in the game, a real asset to the game, but possibly not good enough to play at the elite level. So after maybe 2 or 3 years, that individual will be lost to Cricket PLC. And that's such a shame. That's such a huge loss. Whereas if the ECB or Cricket PLC created a university of cricket, if you like, where qualifications were given, how to be the next CEO or human resource individual, or even ground staff, or whatever it might be, I think we need to create a conveyor belt of intelligence that stays in the game and that develops the game. What I see, or what I've seen, is a lot of intelligence, and I think somebody put a comment up there, cricket is anti-intelligent. I think it is. I think you're absolutely right. We're losing so much brain power, grey matter, that is wrong. It should be in some way kept within the game, and that's where I think the ECB and the stakeholders within cricket should actually create a university of cricket in some way that are then developing qualifications that are keeping people in the game.
That's a really, really interesting proposition. Thank you, Sean. John Neal, did you want to kind of respond to that? Yeah,
it's a really interesting one for me, because prior to my life full-time in cricket, I spent as a professor of a business school. And this is a problem moving from into an ecosystem where you need the leadership to be aware that other people have similar guiding principles, and you have a combined unified objective. And what I noticed when I came into sport is they don't have a combined unified objective. They will say they do, produce England cricketers, but the truth is that's not the case. And if you want to change that, if you put the business school approach to this, is exactly as Sean has just said, you need to re-educate our leadership group. Now, in all the time I've been involved in cricket, I never saw the opportunity for a leadership program available to the leaders of these independent units, where they could come together, network, discuss and agree a consistent approach to enable the overall objectives of the ecosystem. And so what happens is, in my opinion, I'm going to be quite ruthless here, some of the leaders who work in cricket are not qualified to lead. They were either former players who thought that was a good way to stay in the game. They hadn't gone out of cricket to work in another environment. There's only one that I can think of that went away and got qualified in leadership, but it's such a missed opportunity. If you've got 18 county CEOs and you've got national counties and you ran an ongoing leadership development program for them, you can discuss a lot of these issues and they will work together. But whilst they work not in an ecosystem, whilst they work in their own defined channel, they're going to carry on looking after number one. And as Steve says quite rightly, of course you're going to look after number one, where if you don't, your members get rid of you and you're gone. So I think there's a huge opportunity for leadership across the game, and not just for learning about how to be a leader, but to create networks of opportunity and to discuss how can we collaborate to come together to work as an ecosystem.
Yeah, John, I just want to jump in there. Somebody on the chat has actually posted something that I was instrumental in getting off the ground, and that's the DMU course, and that was very early stages about creating ethics within cricket. So for DMU to do that, I'm really chuffed, and I do hope that evolves and develops. And as John said there, for me, I can't stress enough how critical it is that we need those leadership programs within cricket to develop the next generation of leaders that can actually then really work at developing cricket PLC.
I think I should jump in there. I mean, the counties are different in different places. If you look at the counties that I know best, Kent, until very recently, for the last 6-7 years, has called itself one club, and the county board and the county club have been integrated under one board. They've just been told that they have to decouple again because the DCB thinks that the county club is a potential systemic financial risk for the county board and the county board's activities, which people might find a little strange. But that decision originally to come together in a membership club was done really without the membership approval. It was just done. And in fact, I know one person who runs or was ex-chair of a club in Kent that was threatened with disciplinary for bringing the game into disrepute, for writing or suggesting in the letters column of the Telegraph that was some slightly dubious legally. But anyway, I mean, that's Kent. The county I probably know best is Somerset, which actually is the county that I showed in that slide earlier, where there is a very close integration between the county board and the clubs. In a place where there is no football, there's obviously a great rugby club. There is a hinterland in Devon and Cornwall too, but essentially that county is bedded in its cricket and in its cricket clubs and in its cricketers, and the infrastructure, the hinterland, the ecosystem, Millfield School, King's Taunton, etc., produces a conveyor belt of players. But the financial strength of Somerset, to the extent that it is able to compete on an equal level with the likes of Surrey and Notts and Warwickshire, etc., is because it's bedded in its communities and it's bedded in its clubs. And whilst I'm not suggesting that that's a model for everyone, I think it's a pretty strong model. And I sense that Leicestershire, what I know from Leicestershire, is pretty similar to Somerset. I felt the passion when I was in Leicester, not for the cricket, unfortunately, but after they won the One Day Cup. So, I think there are models there, but I think there are clearly drivers outside the county framework.
Thank you, John. A couple of people have got their hands up. So I'll just come to Brian first of all. Do you want to unmute yourself and ask your question to our panelists, Brian?
Well, it's in part a proposition rather than a question. I've listened attentively to today, and I've been part of John's development group for too many years. And in a lot of the meetings that we have, we go around this same subject time and time again. And nobody seems to press any buttons to make something happen, to give us a model to at least, in the first instance, give us an understanding of what might work or not. So, and I've talked to John about this only in the last couple of weeks. What we've got at the moment, and I've got it written down here, is a pyramid, ECB, county foundation, because in Yorkshire, where I'm from, it's actually, John's talked about separating them. They all came under an edict in the last couple of years to join them up. Now they're separated for whatever reason. County foundation, the league, the Bradford League, a big league in the country, the clubs, and I don't say all the clubs, what I'm suggesting is a selection, and then below the clubs I've got schools, which I believe, personally, is one of the main planks that we've got to get moving to make cricket work in the years to come. So, the idea that I had was, or I shared with John was, can we find a county somewhere, because we can't ask everybody to do it, we need a model that may not be replicable everywhere, but at least a model that will be brought together by an understanding. And what I've also written down, currently, it appears that each of those that I've just named all work within their own towers. And I go as far as to say, and it's picking up what Sean said about success and what John's saying the same, that how do we join it all up? So if an opportunity could be found and some county could be persuaded to bring together ECB, county, foundation, league, club, and maybe could leave it off at the moment, representation for schools. So at least talk to each other, because we all talk from our own tower to another tower, and no notice is ever taken. We never get any further. We don't understand why we are not moving forward with this or not moving forward for that. And I'll just give you a local example that John has mentioned in a recent article.
Can you do so briefly? Sorry, Brian.
Yeah, well,
we've got other questions.
Well, it's an important point for me, which comes from a club in my own league who've just been deducted points for not having girls' teams. They've been deducted points. And it's come down from ECB to the foundation to the league who've been told to deduct points. And now they're appealing and nobody knows how to deal with it. But the ECB don't want to know. They've ticked their box, they've identified it and passed it down. And there've been many other similar examples. And my final point is that I was talking, and John knows this, and some of you might have heard of the famous dome that we've got, of which there's going to be millions upon millions spent in the country. A famous dome in Bradford, the first, 10 lanes. And I was talking to the manager of that the other day, and he was telling me that a club in the southern England currently doesn't have another club in his proximity within a 5-mile radius. That Bradford Dome has 96 clubs within a 5-mile radius. And let me tell you, we're all singing in the same pot. And that is also, and what I'm thinking of is there's some way that all those different parts of the pyramid can be brought together to talk about it as a consolidated effort. Right.
Thank you so much, Brian. We actually did have a comment in the chat as well from Martin, who says, is it that the first step is the creation of a recreational ECB sub-layer and all clubs feed into that, rather than being kind of fragmented by county boards? So, yeah, there's some interesting suggestions there about what might happen. Do any of our panelists want to come in on that?
Yeah, I don't mind commenting. I think it was nice to hear Brian talk there. I mean, I live in Yorkshire. I live in Halifax, Brian. So
I know all about it. You know Dave Weston very well.
I know him very well. Very good cricketer. Very good cricketer. Yeah, I think what you say there is a very, very good idea. And one of the things, my observations of cricket has been a lot of talking and not much doing. And that is at the very highest level. There's always a lot of talking going on. Somebody's got to grab something. Somebody's got to have the energy to do that, to grab and drive and really push it. And I think that's where cricket lets itself down a little bit. There is a huge amount of talking and maybe not as much doing. And I'd like to see it flip the other way, if I'm honest.
And I'd concur with that, Raf. Collaboration is what we require, absolutely. But you're battling against a group of very large egos that don't want to let go. And when you've got the two role models at the top of the game who have got big egos and aren't qualified, it doesn't set a very good benchmark for anyone else. So when you talk about coming together, collaborating, talking together, developing leadership competence, it scares the living daylights out of them and they won't let it happen. Sorry, just being direct.
John, you were involved in I think consulting to the RFU on developing a sort of leadership framework, a leadership program that went from the sort of grassroots club right to the RFU board. Could that not be done in the ECB, and that the coaches, which I talked about a little bit in my presentation, could be driving that coherence, because they are sort of a similar mindset and they are throughout the organization? Is there a group think there effectively that could actually bring these disparate elements together?
Yeah, I mean, coaches are collaborators and they really care about people. Yes, some of them are desperate to win, but the majority of people get into coaching because they want to develop other people and create a better good. The problem is, and I'll be blunt, I'm not convinced that many national governing bodies really value as coaching in terms of delivery on the ground. That they'll all say it, right? The headlines are there. But when you then look at the appointment of coaches, the sacking of coaches, their development, their requirement to be developed, it tends to go out the window at the altar of win. And I think a lot of coaches look at that and go, do you know what? I think I'd rather just work with my players, work with my group, work with my club, and leave the politics to other people. So I do think they're a powerful group. But what you need is a rare animal, that a coach who wishes to get involved in some of the political leadership stuff. There are a few around. I found Ash Giles was one of those, that he was willing to do that and he was willing to collaborate. And obviously I'm biased because he was my boss and I had a huge amount of time for him. But I think he's quite a rare beast, if I'm honest. But that's perhaps where we need to draw more from. Certainly why we put a little bit more time into leadership within coach development, because that's a huge opportunity for coaches.
Great, thank you. So I can see that we've got 3 hands up. So what I might do is just allow all 3 of you to come in, and then we'll kind of have some concluding thoughts. So Pratik, you've been waiting patiently all this time. So do you want to unmute yourself and ask your question? Thank you.
Thanks, Raf. Just by way of introduction, I know John through some collaboration work we've done. I come from, not from the cricket space, but from a strategy and leadership advisory hat on. And it strikes me that if you step out of the cricket context and you say, what would we do if we were not cricket? What would other businesses, other sectors start to do to shift and make this change? And then it becomes a question of actually, where are we in our development as a sector? And you start to think about I think the slide that John put up earlier, which was, are we operators? Are we going to be enablers, or are we going to shift the system into doing something else? Is the real question that needs to be asked. And I don't know who should be asking that, probably sitting at the ECB somewhere in the county sort of leadership coming together. The other side of it, which is interesting, which is, if you have a corporate and an organization, you would have the leadership thinking at the right level, whether it's operational, enabling, or system change, that is able to make that shift. So there are two issues here, in my view. I'll just offer that as an observation, which is one, the system, the cricket sector has to figure out in the UK in particular where it is in its evolution of where it's headed, because it looks like there's some pretty big stuff that's happening which will leave the counties in a pretty precarious position in not too far away. And in order to make that change, if you don't have the right leadership on the other side able to contextualize that and able to think about what changes need to happen to move that, then that strategic discussion, I think, is really what needs to take place. And we can all sit around talking about operational impact and getting bums on seats and various other things, which tackles your day-to-day cash flow problem, but actually doesn't shift what's going to happen to the sector. And that I think is a much more fundamental issue, and I don't know where that sits. Who needs to think about that?
Great. Wow, some really big questions being raised. I'll come straight to Philip O'Brien, who's second in the queue with his hand up. Philip, do you want to unmute yourself and ask your question?
Thanks, everyone. And thanks to everybody who's organised this. It's a really interesting and stimulating discussion. Listen, I'll bow to the greater knowledge of those people who have experience of the leadership at the top of the game, and interesting to hear their conclusions. As a humble cricket club chairman, okay, I'm not experiencing what I would associate with good quality leadership being driven down, okay? To the extent that I'm just getting on despite it. And I disagree with some of the comments, but I think it's semantic. I think there's lots of good quality leadership in cricket, okay? I see it in clubs that we work alongside. People who are putting their time and energy and passion into making sure that the sport is community focused, that access is broadening, that facilities are growing, but it's not people who are drawing salaries, okay? I'd go further to say, I think the use of the moniker cricket is not helpful, because what happens at county level and ECB is so far removed from what happens in the recreational game that sharing a moniker actually is misleading. I haven't got a proposal for how that could be addressed, but I do think it's almost like comparing medical consultants with health promotion workers. And then just a tiny little anecdote. The other issue is working in silos, I think. I was fortunate to be invited as a chairman to a presentation by the chair of our county board some years ago. And it was an attempt to drill a golden thread from them to us. And it was a lovely day out. We were treated to a day at the county. We had a gorgeous presentation, but of course the presentation stopped at how we could help the county. It didn't feed into how then the county feeds into the ECB and the national team. And I just thought, for me, and incidentally, I saw no follow through after that from the county about what this golden thread would look like. So until something happens to convince me otherwise, I'm cracking on despite what happens at county and ECB. Thank you.
Thank you, Philip. Really interesting to hear from somebody kind of working at the coalface in clubs. And finally, Ian, do you want to kind of unmute yourself and come in?
Yeah, thanks, Raf. I mean, following Philip is very difficult there, because I cannot actually disagree with a word that he said. And I'm working on the coalface day in, day out as well. I think some of the interesting words that have been used quite a lot is that we do operate in silos. There's no two ways about it. There's a coaching silo, there's a recreational, there's so many of them. The one thing that's been mentioned numerous times that we haven't got, and I will argue this with anyone in the world, we don't actually have a pyramid, because pyramids go to the top. And what we actually have is a set of leagues that go all the way up to where they go to. Then it flattens out. We have a gap to national counties, which is in the middle, and then we have the first counties above. As a consequence, whether it be leadership development, admin development, coach development, and most importantly, player development, we don't have a link all the way through to the top.
And it's why so many players get left behind at 18s, 19s and don't go any further. It's why national counties is stronger than it ever has been, but actually doesn't get the recognition that it used to, because it's not, for example, in an Eddie Cup that it used to be like back in the day. And we're missing this big chunk. And I'd sort of sum it up in that silo way, saying that when you've got 33 ECB Premier Leagues, which, for those of you who don't know me, I spend a lot of time, far too much of my bloody time, on doing a podcast about Premier League cricket. Every single one of them operates with different rules, different regulations, different pro rules, different, can't have a pro, can't pay, can't do this, can't that. And that's all down to one set of people. It's down to a governing body that doesn't govern. Because if a governing body was to govern, they would set rules down and away you go. And I see a lot of people nodding. And the example I will use to people on the call to finish this, there's a lot of us on this call who are old enough to remember Grandstand in the 1980s. And we'd have the rugby union results, and it'd be Sale 43 versus Oral 26. And there was a list of 40 or 50 different games every week with one thing in common. They were all essentially friendlies. And they're all essentially friendlies, but we all know that Billy Beaumont had a brown envelope in his boot every single week. What happened was the RFU got it by the scruff of the neck and went, we need a bloody pyramid, and we've got to make it a proper governable pyramid that goes all the way down. A little bit like Sean's right, jealous of them, football have got it. And that's what we're missing in cricket, whether it be from a coaching perspective, an admin's perspective, a club's perspective. We just haven't got that. And that's something that I go constantly on about. And if you ever listen to our podcast, we'll bore you senseless about it, to be frank.
Thank you so much, Ian. Great plug. What's the name of the podcast?
Premier League Cricket Show.
Premier League Cricket Show. There you go. So we've plugged that for you. I'm aware that we're sort of drawing to the end of our hour, and there's been some really, really big issues raised, and some big questions, and I suppose a lot of kind of problem stating. So maybe what I'm going to do is just come to each of our three panelists, and briefly tell us what's the solution. How do we move beyond some of these issues we've just talked about? A lack of leadership from the top, too many silos in cricket. Obviously, there's some acute financial issues. Now, I don't expect any of you to solve this in 30 seconds, but over to you to have a go. So maybe I'll come to you first, Sean, if that's all right.
Yeah, no worries. I think Pratik, Philip, and Ian have really probably hit the nail on the head there. I think Pratik, absolutely right. There needs to be an overall strategy that is communicated throughout the game, that is transparent. It's fascinating to me to hear that some of you guys within cricket have not had sight of a CPA, and I think to myself, well, that's wrong, because you can then understand how a cricket club works, and this communication between a better understanding, if you like, that Philip made that point. I think that is got to be crucial. And I remember, I won't mention the individual's name, but the chief exec never once visited one of the clubs in his area, and that was wrong. And that should be happening on a regular basis. That whole dialogue. You cannot underestimate the value of volunteers. So the people at the top of the pyramid inside their counties should be communicating all the way and be transparent and be understanding. I think Ian raised a very good point there about silos. Yeah, that exists, and that is a big problem of cricket. And I think the governing body have got to grab it, and they've got to kind of work that out. What the answer is, that I do not know. I wish I did. I'd be a wealthy man. But it is a big issue, this silo, lack of collaboration. There's a lot of lip service towards collaboration, and it needs to be worked better.
Thank you, Sean. John Neal.
I think the first thing you've got to do is, as a leadership group, stop reacting to what's happening and start being proactive. They just bounce from problem to problem to problem. And at some point, you need true leadership. As Pratik said, strategic leadership requires a really clear vision, and then you can consult over the vision, and you can say, is it England winning, or is it a really flourishing game? You could say the two are the same. It doesn't matter what that vision is, but when you've got it, then you have to become a national governing body, and you have to start dictating, and you have to accept the fact you are going to upset people. And that welcome to leadership, because at the moment I think a lot of our leadership groups are more concerned about upsetting people than they are about getting the job done. And if you do want to create radical change, not everyone will like it, but that's part of the deal. You look at some of the greatest shifts in society, they've been created by people that eventually lost their jobs, but they created shift. So I think we need to move from a strategic leadership proposition rather than a reactive leadership activity that we currently have. And that will require, I'm sorry to bang on about it, it will require development and people being humble enough to say we need to learn about that and give up a bit of their status and say we really don't know, but we're willing to try, and then govern, right? Make some decisions and follow it through.
Thank you so much, John. Very well said. And lastly, John Swanwick, who obviously kicked us off so well with his sort of proposition and suggestion about a kind of more of a unified approach to this. John, I'm giving you the task of wrapping up the webinar with your own final thoughts. Anything to add?
I think there's one thing. I mean, the Cricket Club Development Network is 1,300 and something people representing roughly about 1,000 clubs. So mostly one person per club, and it's the chair. It's certainly the club development driver anyway. I talk to these people all the time. I mean, hundreds, over the course of a year. I keep being told by the ECB they don't hear these comments, they don't hear these views in meetings. I think clubs have got to take the chairs, or the people who are driving the clubs have got to take responsibility to some extent by turning up to meetings, because they don't. They send reliable people along to county board meetings. You go to a Kent League AGM and it's full of nothing but umpires, because they're the age profile that will be reliable and turn up to the meeting to cast their vote. Or not vote, in fact. So clubs have got to be open and engaged in the conversation, but they've also got to be listened to. And you go on an ECB webinar, I think we've all been on them, and it's quite often they're just recordings. They are actually recordings. And then there's somebody pops up who's live to take a few online questions from the chat room. They've got to be willing to listen. But I know that a few of them have had a few bad experiences, because clubby people do tend to let rip if they get the opportunity. But they've got to be prepared to listen. Now, if you get everybody in the same room and start having the sort of discussion we've had today, maybe it will be the start of a process.
Thank you so much, John. And thank you, everybody, for attending this webinar. Obviously, some very big, important questions raised, and hopefully you found it as useful and interesting as I have. Thank you so much to John Swanwick, to John Neal, and to Sean Jarvis for their input today. And the recording of today's webinar will be on our